It's the Boris Dirk podcast. We are joined today by Stephen Gillaspie, not Gillespie, learned that the hard way. Self-proclaimed draft sicko from the group over at No Ceilings. Go check out their draft guide. They've got a lot of amazing stuff going on right now. I think it is 18,000 plus words, 60 in-depth scouting reports, advanced stats from Synergy. Everything you could want from the draft, Stephen and his boys at No Ceilings have just released. So check that out. But first off, Stephen, very grateful to have you here. How are you?
Man, Drew, Max, I am honored to be here. The first time that we've gotten to link up, but I promise this won't be the last. So, just thanks for having me on it. Thanks for the plug on the draft guide. We're pretty happy with that, pleased with that, and it's been a big year for us at No Ceilings this year. And I'm always happy to get to link up and meet new people. And it's always fun. This beginning stage of like probably a long-term partnership that we're gonna have, like doing shows with each other and whatnot.
For sure. We've been super inspired by the stuff you guys are doing over there. Just as upstart podcasters, freelance media guys, it's really cool to see the growth, to see the numbers going up, and also just love what you guys are putting out. Also, the aesthetics in the draft guide, beautiful. Like
Yeah,
beautiful illustrations, fun stuff to just make it more human and an easy read, as opposed to just, pure nerd numbers for 120 pages. It's a fun picture book for the kids as well.
Yeah, man, and that's all credit to Corey and Rucker over there. They are like the visuals, but our whole team, I think it's about 12 people. I know all the names, but I haven't counted them. I don't know why, but our whole crew poured in, as you could imagine, like months and months of this is just like the culmination of all of our film dive of the entire year, and we all pitched in different prospects and stuff like that, and we're excited. It's kind of like the crown jewel of what we do for the whole year. So, leading up to the draft, we want to do the best that we can to provide people not only good information, but Drew, the way that you put that out, like that means a lot because that's the goal, right? We want it to be consumable. We want it to be fun and interactive. We don't want it to just be like, hey, we watch a lot of basketball players. We think we're pretty smart. Here's words.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we don't want to do that.
yeah,
Yeah, there are a lot of smart guys talking about the draft now, but nobody is doing it quite like you in terms of the whole experience, getting to know a personality, a group of guys who love basketball the way we do. So
And Gal
kudos.
Page, we got Page too. A
Okay.
lot of people say the guys, but I'm gonna be out here. I'm gonna be a gentleman, and I'm gonna throw Page out there too.
there you go.
All right. Let's get into it. So I think I'm higher on the top of this draft than most. Um,
Okay.
I'd have had Steph Castle, my number one guy, probably number five last year between Ant Black, who I had at four, and Cam Whitmore, I had at six. I know you're an Arkansas guy. Interested to hear some
Mhm.
Ant Black thoughts at some point, but um, I'm interested first off, who's number one for you in this class, regardless of
Well,
fit, and where would you have ranked him in the past two drafts? Let's say.
Drew, I hate to kind of squelch that last question, but I don't know. Like, I think that we all kind of like use the recency bias and we say, oh, this person would have been here, but it's all contextual. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of organic, you know, things at work whenever you compare people within their own class. And I think that's what makes a class unique. I have Steph Castle, number one on my board too. He's in the top tier. I don't do like a tier one player for every draft and then not have a player in that tier. I think that that's like hard to do. And I give people who can do that the utmost credit. I do relative tiers. So I have three players in my first tier. I got Steph, or I'm sorry, I just updated it today to four. I'm looking at it right now. I have
Relatable.
Steph Castle. I have Steph Castle, Alex Sarr, Nikola Topic, and Donovan Clingan all in that first tier. But I have Steph number one overall. Now, because of the top of this draft being dubbed a flat draft, I don't think that if I had the number one pick for Atlanta, I would take Steph Castle unless you were going to really invest in him and retool that entire roster. I would probably go Alex Sarr if I was them and I was picking number one in this class. But I think Steph Castle's got the ultimate outcome because I don't know about y'all, but no matter how talented a big man is, we'll see if Victor Wembanyama can be so talented to kind of buck this. But big men need someone to set them up. Like, I remember the draft buzz coming out about Anthony Davis, Carl Anthony Towns, all these big men that are coming out of the draft, and they're unicorns into all these things. It doesn't matter how good they are; they need someone to set them up to be the best version of themselves. And so that's why I have like a Steph Castle as a wing over Alex Sarr, because I think if all things are even and everyone hits their ultimate high end outcome, I think Steph Castle is a more valuable player.
Yeah, I feel very similarly about the top. In terms of like I would if I was Atlanta, I would not take the top player on my board. Um, Now I disagree with both of you guys. I'm probably lower on the Steph Castle train than most people I see on draft Twitter. I will say, two of the guys I'm lower on are Riza Shea and Castle, and they were two of the early guys who I evaluated. So as I'm sort of scrambling for my last few prospects that I'm going to get to, I'm going to get back to Castle and Rizachet just to see if they kind of suffer from me going in and maybe expecting more and they didn't quite deliver on what I expected. But yeah, in a similar way, I have Holland number one on my board. But I would not take him if I was Atlanta just because I think like the fit with him and Jaylon Johnson is not very good on the wings as far as kind of two non-shooter wings who are kind of trying to initiate and get downhill. It just doesn't feel very clean. So I feel like when I see a lot of people's boards, that a lot of people don't have Sar number one, but just his fit is kind of so easy to see with a lot of different teams because he can be a big and he has that floor spacing potential where maybe he could play four, maybe he could play five, and you could just see him fitting into a lot of different contexts. So I would probably also go Sar if I was Atlanta, even though he's third out of my top tier with Holland and Reed Sheppard as well. But yeah, as far as like where I would have ranked guys in the last class, I see Holland as kind of like a similar prospect to Cam Whitmore. So I probably would have had him around like 7 last year. That's around where I had Cam Whitmore. Um, and I know he's one of the more controversial prospects in the class, but I just love his kind of ferocity and athleticism. And if you're telling me there's going to be a multi-time all-star like two-way wing in this class, I think he's the best bet for it with his kind of physical profile and competitive mindset, at least from the game tape. So yeah, I don't know where you're at on Holland. I know he's a very divisive figure.
He is, and it really depends on like your philosophy is going to play into a lot of your evaluation for Ron Holland, because I hear a lot of smart people, smarter than I, that look at him and they see that, and they compare him to your Cam Whitmore's. I'm even hearing players like Jaylen Brown being thrown up as like a comparison, and I'm not there. For one, he's like actually shorter than a lot of those like power two-way wing type guys that succeed in the NBA. He's a good athlete. I just think that he looks as good as he does in this class because it's really lacking a lot of athleticism at the top end of this draft. So I think that helps him stand out. But going back and looking at him against like a Thompson twin or even a Cam Whitmore, who I thought was an underrated athlete coming out of last year's draft, I think that he's just like a half step behind, and that may seem insignificant, but the NBA, as my buddy Nick at our site likes to say, the NBA is a game of inches, and I think that if he's a little bit shorter and he's a little bit less athletic, he's not that great of a shooter really at all, and I don't know how he scales. You know what I mean? Like the usage that he had on the Ignite, he dominated the on ball, like led the team in scoring. And there's a lot to be said as an 18-year-old going into the G League and just flat out dominating athletically. Most of his game comes in transition, which, depending on the team that you go to, may or may not be a thing. And I don't think that NBA teams are just going to let him like run into the paint and jump over them. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So I have him 14th on my board, but in a lot of people's eyes, I look really foolish by having them. So like, even though I'm like the draft guest here on the show, like best believe that there are other people out there who look at Ron Holland and have him as high as you do. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So like I respect the opinion. And the thing about this year's draft with it being flat, you got to go with your gut, man, because like there is no prospect standing up, waving their arms in the air, say, "Hey, I'm the number one guy. Pick me, pick me, pick me." Like everyone's just kind of like quietly like, "Hey, do you want to come over here and check me out?" You know what I mean? So that's what makes this draft more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on Holland. I have him at 12. For me, I'm just a little bit scared off. And 12, I think he's really good,
Yeah.
but it's the bull in a china shop stuff that I feel like is a bit monotonous in his offense right now. Like all of his offensive flashes are just straight line drives, refusing to be denied. they're kind of like backhanded insults, like they're compliments with Ron Holland. Like I don't like that he's always at 100 miles per hour on
Yeah.
offense. Something that I really love about Steph Castle is the stop start stuff, the way he's able to manipulate the space between himself and his primary defender, look off a secondary defender. I feel like Castle's more of a hooper's hooper, your favorite prospect's favorite prospect. And there's just a lot less feel in the Ron Holland offense. And he's a less consistent defender, albeit G League, weird setting. But and you know, Holland has the dimensions to be a great defender and clearly the will to do it. We'll see. Right now it's less refined. You mentioned the size stuff. I'm interested in that because I'm wondering how much does height actually matter to you? Because looking back at Jaylen Brown's combine, for instance, he's actually had an 8'6" standing reach. Holland's an 8'8", similar wingspans. Does the height matter to you? Like, this is really
I
interesting
think
to
so.
me.
I think so. And it's positional. You know,
Yeah.
I don't care so much if a point guard is 6'2" compared to 6'4". Now if they're like 6'5", 6'6", like that's pretty interesting. Like that's where we start getting like, okay, like this is a jumbo creator. Like you graduate from being an initiator to being a jumbo creator. And there's a lot of value in that because I think the larger the frame, the more availability there is for them to fill out with when they start hitting like your NBA facilities and start getting that level of training, depending on their body type and like scientific stuff that I don't understand or claim to be an expert in, right? But the more frame you have available to add mass,
Yeah.
I think the better you are going to fare in the NBA as far as like injuries or like even just getting bumped off your spot. Like you have to have strength, and that's something that I don't know if you guys remember, but a few months back, Peyton Pritchard spoke on like how he was able to play the game is because he got stronger. And I think that strength is just like such an underrated aspect of success, and especially translating up, right? Like when we see players struggle, it's largely because they just can't physically compete on the floor, right? And if you don't have like that NBA level strength, which I'm not saying Holland doesn't have, by the way, like Holland is like very well put together. Like he is an NBA level athlete. I just wouldn't classify him as elite.
Mhm.
If you don't have that like requisite strength, you're just not going to see the floor. I think like Ben Sheppard might be the only rookie that I ever like saw come in and contribute despite not having like I would say like an NBA ready frame. Like he's just super wiry though, right? So
Yeah.
there's like different body types and outliery stuff that are associated with each one. But yeah, strength and frame and length are huge, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're small and you don't have wingspan, like you're gonna get picked on. Now, if
But
you're like a Devin Carter in this class and you have like a +6 wingspan at his size and the athleticism, then you're probably like an all NBA level defender.
yeah. But I'm also thinking in terms of the whole package, the height, wingspan, standing reach, because we've also seen guys like J Dub in
Mhm.
OKC. He's only like 6'5" in shoes, maybe 6'6". But he has the same standing reach as Ron Holland. And I think sometimes you get the best of both worlds. You get the reach and the lower center of gravity. All this stuff is super interesting to me. If you look back at Jaylen Brown's Cal tape, like it's auspicious for a guy like Ron Holland. He was a super unpolished offensive player, but he was just naturally thicker. And I think Ron's going to put on a lot of muscle, but Jaylen Brown was particularly jacked at that age and has only gotten stronger, obviously, over the last few years. But back to Castle in your mind. Let's say the last two drafts off the cuff. Do you think you have any idea where Steph Castle would have been on your board?
I would probably say like top 10 without looking at any of
Yeah.
my boards right now. I would say I would say definitely a lottery level talent, like easily. It's just hard to say. I'd venture to say, like in most drafts, probably anywhere from like 6 to 12 comfortably, I think would be right where I'm living. Like even last year's draft, like we still have a long runway ahead of all these guys too, right? Like one year doesn't tell the whole story. But I think like right now you say there might be four players definitely better than whoever the best prospect is in this year's class. Maybe you can argue five. But then like you get into that six neighborhood and you're like, I don't know, probably I could argue the number one player on my big board in this class within there.
Yeah.
So I'd say like 6 to 12, somewhere in that neighborhood.
And with Castle, I'd be curious as someone who's a little bit lower on him. I guess first, the big question is, do you buy that he'll be a solid shooter? Which I mean is somewhat a crapshoot, but just like, is there evidence that makes you think he'll be a solid shooter? Because my concern with him is I see him more as like an off guard than a wing in the NBA, and I am not super interested in a shooting guard who can't really shoot. I guess as like taking with the number one pick in the draft, and I understand he's an awesome defender, like but if the scoring game isn't going to be there necessarily, some of the sort of outcomes I see for him, he's got more athleticism than some of these guys, but kind of in like the Terrence Mann type of player, or very different personalities, but like a Dylan
Sure.
Brooks type of player. So I guess offensively, because the defense I'll take is a given that he's one of the best perimeter defenders in this class, but offensively, how do you see his game scaling up in terms of fitting into an NBA team?
Well, I mean, without even being the primary option at UConn, I think we kind of over index whenever we're talking about like, is he a point guard? Like that conversation kind of dominated the internet for a little while, right? And we forget that this dude scored 16 points per game in the Big East as a freshman, as like an ancillary player. You know what I mean? Like Donovan Clingan was like the alpha and omega when it came to this team, but somehow, some way, Steph Castle scored like 16 points per game in college basketball by not being a 3-point shooter, right? So I think that 3-point shooting, for one, you have to ask yourself that question with a lot of the perimeter players in this class. I think that what separates Castle is that he's already kind of like bigger than some of these. What my buddy Maxwell, and I think he borrowed it from Chuck from Chucking Darts, is this not quite wing size. I think Steph is like 6'7" in shoes, right? So luckily we play basketball in shoes. He's gonna be like a perimeter player in the NBA at 6'7", whereas like Man is like 6'4", 6'5". He's kind of like point guard size, but doesn't have point guard skills. So he's relegated to playing the wing, and he's kind of undersized. So he struggles on the defensive end. Like Steph Castle really isn't going to struggle with that in that aspect, right? I actually just like as a position, I don't believe in like the traditional point shooting guard, small forward, so on. I have him listed as a perimeter player because I do think that he has uh, the requisite handle to be able to give you some minutes at the one. I think that he does like make really good movements away from the ball. And I do think that the shot can improve. I actually did a shot study think piece for No Ceilings about a month or so ago. And typically, like either the number one picks or the best players out of it, any draft class, like both of those groups, top pick, best player, they all improve as 3-point shooters when they get to the NBA, right? So like if you're picked highly, even the poor shooters, like if you're picked highly, you go to an NBA team, your shot really does improve, right? Like we say that like players don't improve in the NBA, they kind of do. They kind of like these shooting coaches are so good now, and like we're at an age group with players where they grow up watching players shoot the basketball. So like
Mhm.
people like players are learning at a young age like how to shoot. Even though the percentage is bad, some people even call it like outliery bad. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Steph grows into like I'll even be modest and like let's say like a 33 to 35% 3-point shooter, right? I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility. We want everyone to be a 40% 3-point shooter, but there are some really good NBA players that carve out like great roles in the NBA, even now without being 40% 3-point shooters, right? So I think with just his intelligence, his like dog mentality on the defensive end, he will beat people off of movement away from the ball on offense. And he's got a little bit of a handle. Like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he's going to be like a Jason Tatum level creator with the ball in his hands, but I don't think like a Chris Middleton outcome is outside of the realm of possibility where you don't run like most of your offense through Chris Middleton, but he's smart. He makes good passes. I mean, Steph Castle, I think, had like a 1.9 assist to turnover ratio at college, so he knows how to make
Mhm.
good reads. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Steph Castle is like your like weak side, like creator, tertiary creator on a team while being a really dominant two-way player.
And the intel on him from my distant perspective is awesome. Um,
Yes.
Hurley went on the Russillo pod and said he sees Castle as a Drew Holiday type player, which I think is great because that's how I
Mhm.
see Castle. Like he could play on this Celtics team and be another cog in their impenetrable defense and make all the right passes on offense. The handle is real for a guy his size, and I'm more confident than Ron Holland's shot is broken than Steph Castle's. If you watch the Holland Castle one-on-one high school senior year game, like it's hard to have Ron Holland above Castle. That's why this draft is going to cause a pod co-host divorce with us. But let's get past
Hope
that
not.
because
Yeah.
Steven, you've now mentioned obviously two of your favorite ceilings in this draft being Castle and Sar. Who would you say is the third ceiling that gets you most pumped and why?
So I have Cody Williams, number 7 on my board. And
Wow.
I think a lot of people who are in on Cody, first off, like I I acknowledge that he has a brother that's like really good in the NBA, but that has nothing to do with my evaluation at all. Right. So I'm just like evaluating the individual. If his last name was Smith, I would still feel the same way I do about him now, right? Um, when you're looking at a guy who's like barely going to be like 19 years old come draft night, he's 6'8", roughly 190 pounds, who came into the season a highly touted recruit, just has a nose for the rim, right? We are super concerned. I say we is like the royal we, right? We're concerned with his frame, and it kind of bears itself out in some ways on defense. People are concerned about the rebounding. I think that was more like a schematic thing because he played with like Lampkin, De Silva, KJ is an underrated like guard rebounder as well. So there's a lot of rebounding on the team. But when I look at his size, when I look at his just like natural knack to get to the rim, despite suffering injuries, despite not being like the largest frame out there, he just looks so smooth playing basketball. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And like he shot like 50% from deep to start the year and got hurt, came back and finished the season shooting 40% from three on the year. I just think that there's so many things that like there's a lot of intangible qualities with Cody that I think if he hits his high end outcome, he could be the best player in this class. And
Mhm.
I'm not trying to be hyperbolic or superlative or anything like that. I truly believe like with his size, his like positional ball handling, he has good vision as well. And if you can get him to stay on the court for a whole season, which I think like this was just a tough year, like he got hit in the face really hard. You know what I mean? I don't think that makes him an injury prone player that he got whacked in the face really hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I just think that there's so much to like about him as a player. Now, if you do want to like glean off of Jaylon and like what Jaylon could mean for Cody's development, I think it has to do with the frame, right? Like I mentioned, he's not like the thickest player out there, but if you look at what Jaylon was able to do at Santa Clara for a couple years, and now we were talking about him and what he's able to do for Oklahoma City. Although his standing reach isn't that great, it's because he's really strong. You know what I mean? Like he's a stout dude, and obviously they share blood, right? So I think that if you were to glean anything from Jaylon, it would be the hope that he's able to fill out to some level of degree to what Jaylon did, and
Yeah.
maybe just like having the advantage of a brother who knows how the NBA works. That probably helps you out in some intangible aspects as well. But I think like I said, I have Cody 7th on my board, and it's just because he has such like a natural feel for the game. He's so fluid at that size. Like teams love that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I love all three of the guys from Colorado. I'm much higher than consensus on both Tristan and KJ Simpson as well. As you might have, I have a kind of unique draft scouting process where I'm really not plugged into college basketball at all during the season. I'm very much focused on the NBA. And then
Sure.
once the season's over, I go back and watch as many full games as I can of all these guys to kind of, so my opinions are often very like different from the discourse that's been going on all year. But as you might imagine, I was not a huge fan of Lampkins on Colorado just because he's like clogging up all the space for Tristan and Cody and KJ. But
Yep.
yeah, I find Cody Williams super fascinating, and I loved Jaylon Williams when he was coming out a couple years ago, and it's some of the same tool sort of traits in terms of just the kind of unique way of moving that they both have. Not they're the same to each other at all, but they both move very differently from a lot of guys you see on a basketball court.
Mm-hmm.
And I really buy the defensive upside with him. Just his frame. I thought he didn't even necessarily super know what he was doing on defense all the time, but just with how big and long he is and mobile, guys just had a really hard time getting around him one on one. My favorite comp for him right now, I think, is like Andre Karolinko, going back
Ooh,
to like pulling that one out from the old Utah Jazz days of just a
AK-47. Yep.
AK-47, yeah. And his shot kind of was questionable throughout his career, but he was a little bit ahead of his time as like a kind of wing playmaker, defensive specialist. And I think that's a very solid outcome for him. But I think he does have some offensive upside as well. Like he's got these really unique finishes around the basket. 42%.
Outstanding touch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. 42% from three on very low volume and 71% from free throw also on low volume. So you'd like to see him like bump both of those up fine. But I think the shot like looks fine overall. And yeah, I'm very high on Cody. I've got him. I haven't finalized my order yet, but he's going to be somewhere from 4 to 9. I've got a big tier of guys in that range. And now there's increasing buzz that he could go in the top five
Yep.
this year, which would be high for I think where a lot of draft people have him. So yeah.
I was just going to say, I've kind of been high on him all year long. And I think one thing that we need to do is like remember that we're scouting human beings as well as basketball players, right? And I'm not trying to get like humanitarian here, but like you come into the season, you're playing well, you get hurt, right? You come back with the chance that you might ruin your draft stock, right? But you come back and you play. And Tristan da Silva is having an outstanding season. You know, KJ Simpson is having an outstanding season. Do you come in and say, give me the ball so I can improve my draft stock, or do you try to find a way to help your team win? And that's what I think Cody was trying to do, right? Like things could have gone a lot different for him and his team as a whole. But I feel like if you contextualize what happened with him, like getting hot, missing a lot of time, getting injected back into a lineup that was already kind of finding their stride in a lot of ways. Trying to come back in is difficult. Like even Cam Whitmore struggled with finding cohesion for Villanova once he missed the start of his season. And then he comes back against Oklahoma, makes a couple of good plays, is like in and out of the lineup. It's hard, right? Whenever coaches and teammates are trying to win and make it to the title, you're also trying to contribute to that, but you also have draft stock attached to your name as well. So I think that's where people kind of skew a little, or like there's such variability because I think there's like a visibility bias. Like we just didn't see as much Cody as we did some of these other players.
Yeah. Cody is both the guy who I think has moved the most on my board over the months and also the guy that keeps me up at night the most because I have him at 15 currently.
Mm.
Yeah, judge me. I think
I am right now judging.
what really scares me, I'm not as worried about the rebounding, although, it would be nice if it was a
It
little bit
would.
better. And I feel like I'm way too hard on a guy with his frame at his age who went 55-42 splits, albeit on lower usage, but clearly just knows how to play. Like you said, there's touch, there's feel just in terms of movement, having a guy on his back, kind of knowing what to do to find angles to the basket. All of that stuff is very impressive for a guy at his size and age. I'm just a little bit worried about the lack of a bankable skill as he's entering the league. He shoots the ball a little bit in the middle of his body, but so does his brother, and it's worked so far. It's not the quickest release, but he's so big that that might not be a big issue. I just feel like there are guys ahead of him on my board that I know are bringing something to the league right away that will translate.
Mhm.
And I'm worried a tiny bit about Cody, that he's like one of these raw quarterbacks who really could have used an extra year to polish his game just so that he'll have more opportunity early in his career to work on the things he needs to work on. I hope he can put on some good weight before his rookie season because I think he measured in at the combine under 180. Am I wrong?
Let me see.
I have to go back and look, but it's like it's sub his listed weight. I know that he was listed at Colorado at 190, and I think he weighed in a little bit under that.
Yeah,
I think
178.
your concern. Yep, 178. There you go, Drew. I think your concerns are valid for what it's worth. Like, if you were to ask me what his bankable skill is, I would just say that he's big and like has feel, right? Like, and
Yeah.
but players in the NBA have to have size and feel to succeed, right? And that has to do with like just the amount of games that he had. Like it's a very small sample size. Then
Yeah.
I don't feel great about it, but if I don't feel great about some of the larger sample sizes that I saw from some of these other players, so he
Yeah.
has kind of that Shaden Sharp mystique surrounding his name a little bit, right? Where man,
For
he's
sure.
big and he knows. It looks like he knows how to play basketball. Let's pick this guy up and see what he does, right? So
Yeah. I think
there's a
and
little bit of that.
I think the defense is a relatively bankable skill, at least the on-ball defense from what I saw. And a lot of that is just related to his physical tools. But yeah, and I don't see necessarily like a sort of primary wing initiator upside with him. I do have some concerns about like his first step as well and his ability to like create the initial advantage in an offense. But I do think he can be like one of those elite kind of complementary wings, sort of like Jaden McDaniels is for Minnesota, that type of player. I definitely see that as a realistic outcome.
I was listening to an interview. I think it was with KOC on the Ringer, and he's out in California, or it was at the time, like doing training with a P3, and they do like a lot of body analytics and stuff like that, like how you move and compare your frame and movement and stuff like that. Funnily enough, some of the names that he was compared to, we just discussed, with McDaniels being one, and then his brother being the other, and we were talking about how he moves so similar to his brother. Like that's what the analytics at P3 shown as well. So, I mean, if I'm talking about a guy who's size and feel and has same movement patterns as like Jaylon and McDaniels, hey man, like it's a hard proposition to pass up on in this year's draft, in my opinion.
Shout out P3. I saw they also did some work on AJ Mitchell, who I have at 22. I absolutely love AJ Mitchell. The level of competition in the Big West is a bit of a red flag. But I think it's unfair to call something a red flag that was completely out of his control. I kind of like that he stayed loyal to a program and got better each year. But they said AJ Mitchell has some Jalen Brunson-like biomechanics. Just saying. But back to Cody.
Drew and I were texting about how we need to do away with all the like combine drills and just have P3 run the combine so we can see who all these guys compared to physically. Because like I don't need to know how fast you can like run around the paint, but if I could know how your deceleration compares to James Harden, I'd like to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some agents would probably hate that, though.
True,
that's where
true.
the pushback would come from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Max, to your point, though, I'm not in love with Cody's first step. I think if Cody becomes a really effective driver in the NBA, he's going to be more of a last step guy. I think he has some of that decel at the rim, leave a guy running, and he's just laying it up. I think he eclipsed 70% at the rim in his freshman season on lower usage, but there's so much touch. And then, I hope it translates because he seems like a really likable dude as well. Okay, moving on. Who has moved the most on your board, Stephen, and why can't you quite figure them out?
So can I get a little bit more like, are you talking about like up, down, or just like total number of spots like throughout the season? Like which way do you want me to take this, man?
How about, any of it? Magnitude, sheer number, up and down, just whoever you've been the most ambivalent about through this cycle.
Like, one day you have him at 5, and then you're like, oh, I'm actually not sure if he's a lottery guy, and you just keep going back and forth if there is a guy like that.
Buzelis, I think Buzelis might be my guy. And y'all were talking about like a podcast co-host divorce. My buddy, my co-host Maxwell, is the biggest Buzelis guy on No Ceilings, like top 5 player. And we've had some heated conversations for anybody who like listens to like our group mock drafts that we do, where like we have to all get like a certain amount of votes so they make our combined big board. We had some pretty heated discussion on Buzelis on the last one, because I think the sell with Buzelis is that he's just big, like he's tall, and he's a good weak side rim protector. And if you're big and tall and a good weak side rim protector, but you can't shoot and you're not a center, right? And your sell coming into the season was that you're this Hedo Turkoglu, Franz Wagner type of player, but you can't shoot. Playmaking's not that great. And you're just kind of a cool weak side rim protector guy. Like, do I want to take that even in the lottery? Like, I finally just bit the bullet today because we're having to do our like final big board submissions for no ceilings. I have him 21,
Ooh,
and
same
I
or 20.
I
Wow.
yeah, I have him 21, and I like he was a top 10 dude for a lot of the year. And then I'm like, okay, well, he had a lot of high school hype, and call me a coward, but like high school stuff like has to be an evaluation as well, right? You got to kind of figure that stuff in there too, because college and now the G League, which is rest in peace now. They're at least the Ignite portion anyway. Um, it's hard to contextualize a lot of that stuff. And Buzelis does have some staying power in the NBA because of his size, because he is a pretty solid defender, and because he does have good positional handle. I think that gives you a lot of runway. But I mean, would you take Leonard Miller top 5 in this year's draft class? I wouldn't, right? I was kind of lower on Leonard Miller last year. And I think Leonard Miller actually is a little bit better. Like, if I'm going to pick like one prospect during their season to this one,
Wow.
I think Leonard Miller might be a little bit better. And he was in a pretty strong draft class. Um,
Wow.
I just, we talk about historically bad shooters, right? Like Buzelis was off. Like Ron Holland's a bad shooter, and he was better than Buzelis. Like, and Buzelis, like he's dubbed this like playmaking dude. He didn't play make at a high level either. Like,
Negative
I
assist to
just
turnover.
negative assist to turnover. Like the processing isn't great. He competes on the rebounds though, and he's a good. Again, there are things to like about him. But when I'm looking at him climbing up these other reputable outlets board, like climbing up boards late in this, like he's not even playing basketball anymore, and he's climbing up boards as you and I are having a conversation right now. Someone is moving him up on their big boards right now,
KOC
and
has him at 3, I think, right now. I mean,
I love dude. KOC is the best, right? Like I love KOC. I've been listening to that dude like for a long time. Been following him on the Ringer. Like we're all entitled to opinions, and I could be flat out wrong. Like Buzelis is going to be one of the dudes in this year's draft class that's like a general manager is going to have to like stake their reputation to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at his skill set relative to other players at his position and relative to the other players in this draft class, like, do I want to draft a tall, neat, help side defender who can dribble a basketball a little bit? Like, I don't know, man. Like, Leonard Miller didn't get a lot of playing time for the Minnesota Timberwolves this season.
all right.
So,
Time for me to
yeah,
bring some Matas positivity in here. I was by
okay.
no stretch a Leonard Miller guy last year. I just think
Well, we were a CD Sissoko podcast last year.
yeah. We were
Oh,
CD
Love
Sissoko.
City.
I think
Love City.
I had CD at like 10 last year, so I'm
Okay.
sweating
I
that
like
one out
City.
right
I
now.
didn't love him then. Yeah. I like City. I didn't love him then. Yeah.
I've been consuming No Ceilings content nonstop. I saw the conversation that you and Maxwell had about Matas, and I was laughing in my bedroom because, yeah, you guys were just not on the same page. And I think that was a beautiful microcosm for this class in general. It's like Cody, Matas, a lot of guys with interesting tools, and like a couple of them are going to pop. It just feels harder than ever to predict who the poppers will be.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Matas, I think I have him at, let's see, I think 8 right now. So 9. I have him at 9.
Sell me then, Drew, please. Like
Yeah.
I'm legitimately like being as genuine as I can
Yeah.
because I hear a lot of people talk about him. Please sell me on him.
What, like top 7 in blocks in the G League as a 19-year-old who needs to put on weight very badly. Got stronger as the season went on, got way better at taking a bump, at delivering a bump on offense. I really like the guy, but it's always hard to know how much that matters because young prospects these days are so polished and so good at talking that I feel
Yep.
like it just becomes hard to know which intangibles really matter.
Pro Insights interviewing kids at like 14 years old,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Matas has been in that media circus for a long time now. As like, Parent was a pro. He's been at the top of his class for years. To your point, the playmaking reputation, I don't think was ever quite earned. Because even back in his high school days, I went back and watched some of the high school stuff. Like great vision was never there, I don't think, for his size. But he is an athlete. He is a really bouncy athlete at 6'10". measured and tested well at the combine, played really hard. I think it's just like the blocks at his thin frame were really impressive to me. And I think I buy the jump shot a little bit more than you. So like I kind of see him as like a 3 and D forward. And right now it's a little bit of D and no three. So it's scary.
Yeah.
But I just trust the bounciness, the transition finishing, the power. I think that he's going to continue to put on weight and look like an even different athlete at the NBA level. And like I said, the playmaking flashes weren't even really there in high school, but the shooting flashes were. And we've heard ad nauseum about his senior year 3-point shooting. I think he shot over 40%. The senior year high school shooting for Matas has been talked about ad nauseum. He was over 40%. His shot does not look broken at all to me. Like that looks like a very fixable, simple release. It's not dynamic, but I think he can catch and shoot in place. Like I really buy that that's going to work within a couple of years. I worry about his very beginning, just, probably still weighing under 200 pounds and the shooting not being ready. It could be a really difficult fit. But we also got to give Matas and Ron Holland just a little bit of shooting grace. They moved from the high school line to the NBA line in 1 year. None of the
Mhm.
college shooters we've talked about had to do that. I'm sure Reed Sheppard could have handled it, but these developing shooters are not yet built to handle the NBA line, and their percentages reflect that. Um, but yeah, I just think scaling way down, we're not going to be asking Matas to do much off the dribble, because I actually think I don't love his shot creation stuff. It's a lot of like back a guy down and then shoot a mid-range fadeaway off one leg. That's kind of his go-to move. And I just don't think that's going to be viable at the next level, at least for a little while until maybe he adds some strength.
Yeah.
So for me, this is just transition finisher, long active defender, and a jump shot that I hope will come within a couple of years.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of like the sell with most of the top wings in this class, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that you kind of even Steph, love Steph, number one prospect on my board, right? But Stephon Castle wasn't a great shooter, right? But you have to look at touch indicators too, right? Like, do you finish well on the half court? What's your free throw percentage? Like, what's your long two
Yeah.
percentage? Do you shoot off the dribble? How many threes are you putting up too? Because like for these young guys, it's not even necessarily the percentage, but the just the sheer volume that you're putting up too, right? Like that
Yeah.
can be huge for the projection of young players moving forward as shooters. So
Yeah.
I agree, there's stuff to like. I just it like philosophy is like what's splitting the difference in a lot of the evaluations this year.
Side note.
I think Matas also, yeah. So I have him at 9. I think he would be a mid first guy in an average draft. And so I really like him. I'm not all in on him. But I just think in a typical draft, he's an interesting toolsy mid first combo forward.
Yeah. I'll keep my thoughts on Matas quick because basically, Steven, you feel how I feel. I've got him around 20 as well. And he's a guy where everything except the result kind of looks good, where like the shot looks good, it just doesn't go in quite as much as it seems like it should. And the free throws were under 70% as well, which is a pretty concerning figure. And, he flashes good passing, but has a negative assist turnover ratio. Sometimes he looks like he can't handle the physicality that he's playing against. And then sometimes he's like rising up for ferocious dunks. So yeah, he's probably, I think, the one of the bigger mysteries to me in this class. I feel about him the way Drew maybe feels about Cody, where I just don't see like a bankable skill aside from the athleticism. So yeah, I was gonna say side note on the 3-point shooting volume. That's why I love Keyshawn George because he gets those babies up. And I think it might have been Ignacio from you guys who did like shooting prospect comparisons to previous year, and he had a lot of
Yep.
elite shooters grouped in with Keyshawn George, which made me feel a little bit more confident in my love for him.
I think Maxwell has another shoot. We're having a lot of shooting projection pieces out on the website this year, so I think our Maxwell is going to be having something coming out this upcoming week.
Nice.
Totally understand the scary touch indicators with Matas. I will say though, like Cody was like 70.5% from the free throw line on lower volume than Matas. He made like 0.7 threes per game. So even though he shot 41%, like at some point we're splitting hairs on low volume. And I think sometimes it's pretty crazy when we say a guy, who played 30 college games and shot 33% from three is drastically different from the guy who shot 37%. Like it's like, he made a couple more threes in his 1 year of college. So but Matas isn't a 33% guy. He's like a 27% guy. So it's a scary class, but a lot of interesting tools in each of these guys. All right. Stephen, if you could observe, be privy to a personal workout, a private workout with only one guy in this class, who and why? Is it Matas? Is it just the same answer?
No, I think that I've seen him play enough basketball. I like Devin Carter. One, just because like his film this year was phenomenal. Two, his combine was just phenomenal. And three, all the intel that we're getting is that he is crushing workouts. Like far and away the best player. Like it doesn't matter what position group he's working out with, what other prospects he's with. He is just owning workouts. And he's not only owning workouts, but even when he's doing like individual stuff, he's like stopping the workouts, going back, regrouping, and staying until he gets it right. So that type of stuff is like really endearing to me. I'm sure that NBA teams love that same type of attitude, mindset, and approach and output when it comes to those things. And when you got a guy who's, I think, in shoes roughly about 6'3", has a 42-inch like vertical, breaks the 3/4 sprint combine record, and it all looks like it matches on film. And by the way, what cracks me up about Devin Carter is like his defense. He scored like 20 points per game for Providence too, right? Like,
Yeah.
and he improved as a 3-point shooter drastically. And the shot is a high arcing shot, but he shoots it with such range and confidence and volume that it's like, I think it's real. And this dude, he's basketball is Troy Polamalu, right? Like he runs like his hair's on fire.
Yeah.
And I could talk for hours about Devin Carter. I could only imagine like just being in a gym with him and just watching him go to work. Defense, rebounding, shooting, underrated playmaking. Like, not saying he's going to lead a team, but I trust him to make good decisions with the ball in his hand type guy. I would just sit down and watch this dude go to work and probably be the best workout I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Big Devin Carter pro podcast. I've got him currently 7, but in that group of like 4 to 9. I think Drew, you've got him top 10 as well.
I have him at 6.
Now.
6,
yes.
5. All right,
let's
we're
go.
5, 6, 7. And yeah, if you want to see like how you fall in love with Devin Carter, for anyone listening, like if you watch the first half of his game against UConn from March, I remember that was one of the last games I was doing for Castle and Klingon, so I was kind of honed in on them, and then I'd heard Providence had an interesting guard, so I was kind of like watching him out of the corner of my eye too, and he just makes like 3 or 4 wow plays in terms of deep threes, like blocking jump shots, ball denial, crazy rebounds and traffic, all in like the first 10 minutes of the game. And immediately all my attention was just on Devin Carter, basically. Yeah, he's someone who absolutely pops off tape. Having seen kind of the deep playoff runs that Boston has made with their kind of jack of all trades guards in the last few years, whether it's now Drew Holiday, Derek White, or previously Marcus Smart. Like, I think he has a lot of similarities with those guys. Maybe not as much offensive polish as Drew, but more in like the Derek White, Marcus Smart type camp. Josh Hart's another comp that gets brought up a lot because of the rebounding and the general tenacity, although they play in different ways, but kind of impact the game in non-scoring ways similarly. Although, as you mentioned, he did also average 20 points a game, and his shot and his shot making really I wasn't following him last year, but it seems like took a big jump this year. So
huge.
Yeah. Drew, if you want to wax about Devin Carter, go ahead.
I'm talking a lot as usual. Every couple of years, there's a guy, because like Max said, he gets into this evaluation process a little bit later than me because I'm also a college junkie. I said to Max early in this process, Devin Carter should be the first guy you watch. I'm in love. And I'd like to say I get a lot of guys wrong, but I did this with Jaylon Williams at Santa Clara as well. And I have a high rate of success when it comes to delivering prospects that Max will fall deeply in love with. I have Devin at 6. If my Blazers got him at 7, I would be ecstatic. I don't care about fit. He's a culture changer. And you said he might lead a team, he might not. I think he's going to lead whichever NBA team he ends up on. He might not be the best player. He's not going to be the best player on a great NBA team, but he still might be the leader of the team the way Alex Caruso has been the emotional leader of the Bulls when healthy. And he has, like you said, he has a lot more in his offensive bag than Alex Caruso. So yeah, I absolutely love Devin Carter. And someone's going to do what they did to Palomalu on a pick 6 in the NBA. Someone's going to yank Devin Carter by the hair. He's going to hit the deck, and House of Highlights is going to get 100,000 likes for it.
Yeah. All the names that we're bringing up in comparison with him, I did I did an article for No Ceilings that I compared him to dating back until all the way up until like before Chris Paul like stopped making all defensive teams. I took Devin Carter and like side by side him with like your Alex Caruso's, your Marcus Smarts, your Drew Holidays, your Derek Whites, your Patrick Beverleys, even some of the other like smaller name guys, like even like a floor of a Miles McBride or Javon Carter, players like that. And dude just compares favorably to all of them. And that's what I think is and Drew, when I say lead, I meant like a lead initiator, right? Like I'm with you like on all that stuff because I think his playmaking is somewhat understated. I think that he's a smart player, but probably not someone who's gonna like be a lead initiator, right? He compares super favorably to all those guys. And I said too when Boston won, I actually tweeted out, I said, for everyone watching Boston in the finals this year, you know, Devin Carter is in this year's draft. Just remember that, right? So, and I finally kind of bit the bullet today. Was like final projects are due for No Ceiling. So, did some adjusting. I was like, he's not really like top 5 typically, dude. But so I'm gonna have him like at that like 6, 7, 8 range. And I was just like, why not? Like if I legitimately believe that he can be an all defensive talent in the NBA, why is that guy not going to be at least the top 5 player in this year's draft? Like,
Yep.
I could get hypothetical with Alex Sarr, with Nikola Topic, with Steph Castle. Donovan Clingan is a safe player, but is it a guarantee that he's going to be a top 8 center in the NBA? Probably not. So if I have those guys ranked ahead of him, why would I have like a Cody Williams, a Reed Sheppard, Rob Dillingham, a Zachary Sachet ranked ahead of him when I'm like, if I am confident in anything in this year's draft, I think that I am most confident that Devin Carter will be an all defensive level talent in the NBA at some point. So why would I not have him top 5?
Yeah.
Well, I have Reed above him. I don't agree with everything you just said, but what I do agree with is that when the draft is only a few days away and push comes to shove and final boards are due, what I really fall back on is who am I okay being wrong about? And if for some reason it doesn't work out with Devin Carter at the next level, I am throwing in the towel. I am so fine with that. I can't have Tyler Smith in my lottery and then it turns out he just can't play because he won't guard anyone in the NBA. Like then I'll feel like a fool because that tape is right there in front of us. But Devin Carter, every game that dude played his last year of college was a movie. And he's a hero that I want in my locker room. And so when you hear that he's having like a legendary pre-draft process, it only adds to the lore that I've been building up in my head. So last year, Brandon Pajemski was the guy that moved the most on my board, and I ended up having him like at 39 or something bad. Because I just didn't think he was gonna be able to guard. Even though the offensive processing was phenomenal and I should have been all in back to back on Santa Clara guys. Unfortunately, I can't say I was. And look at me, I lost my hair because of Brandon Pajemski. So who is the guy keeping you up at night for having so low on your board this year? Is there one dude?
Yeah, I actually got to interview Brandon last year. Super likable dude. The rebounding translates. Like if you're ever
Yep.
wondering about like what skills translate, Brandon showed us last year that it's rebounding.
Yes, sir.
I have Reed Sheppard eighth on my board. Not trying to be controversial. This is probably more philosophy than it is anything. And I don't feel super good about it. I actually had him 10, and today I'm like, I got to turn in my board. I moved Zachary Ricochet down from like 5 to 10, and I finally moved Reed above Bub, which I love Bub Carrington. Uh, I can't get him past a few guys, but I have him at 8. I don't feel good about it, and it's hard to look at someone who shot the way he did in college last year and be like, that's bad. I don't believe that, right? So it's hard to look at him and say that the shooting isn't going to translate, but like, what else will? So he's 6'3". The wingspan is about the same as a standing height, right? So he's 6'3" with 6'3" wingspan. Super understanding that he has an incredible vertical leap, right? It's insane. It's wild, and I understand that like he's got a steal and block rate that is not traditional for 6'3". But I really struggle because I think that people talk about him like he is a dynamic playmaker, and I don't see that. And I think that it's kind of like similar to how the conversation goes with Ron Holland that he is the best athlete in this class. He might be, but like there's not a lot of other great like the only person like really giving him competition in that regard is Ryan Dunn, who's like way down big boards right now. So like there's no one relative to him that's challenging him in that area. I the stuff that worries me with Reed, and this is like the first time I've really like spoke about this on a podcast because this is like how much it keeps me up at night and how big of a coward I am with like the Reed Sheppard discussion. But I worry about his counters, right? Like even when you watch him at Kentucky, whenever like he's pretty much like one read. He's like a one read dude, like and not to play on his name, but he's like a one read type of guy. When he gets walled off, it's pick up the dribble like pretty quickly. I worry about if you're 6'3" with like a neutral wingspan, you can shoot the heck out of the ball, which is why I still have him top 10. And like why I ultimately have him at 8 is because I do believe in the shooting. I just don't buy his ball handling translating up. I don't buy the passing or like the ability to get to the rim. So he wasn't even a real big like rim pressure dude as it was. And there's not like a numerical quantification to what I'm saying. This is like just pure film dive, right? I worry about when he gets in the NBA where everybody's big and everybody's fast and everybody's strong. If you as a guard, like pretty much you're going to be a point guard, right? Like there's no versatility in my opinion. Like he could be Seth Curry where you're like an undersized off guard, but hopefully you got like a jumbo creator that you're playing with to where you can be hidden a little bit. I worry about him getting picked on defensively. I worry about him on the offensive side. I worry about him being walled off pretty easily, not being able to like break a defense down and make a read as a one positional player in the NBA. Like that's where my evaluation is. But all of that can be null and void if he just goes into the NBA and just is like a flamethrower, and with the floor might open up for him in a way that like we didn't get to see in college too. So there's that aspect.
Yeah. We're both big Reed proponents here. I think part of it comes for me. I really like betting on best shooter of the draft type guys. I feel like those guys rarely kind of fail. I mean, remains to be seen with, I guess Jordan Hawkins was probably the best shooter. I thought he was the best shooter in the draft last year, and he had an
Yeah,
encouraging rookie
Howard didn't
year.
really play. Yeah, like
Yeah, probably. I mean, most people probably would have said, I guess maybe Grady Dick. Also, I thought Hawkins was a little bit more versatile as a shooter.
yeah,
But I mean, Reed's a better shooting prospect probably than either of them. I mean, shooting over 50% from three on the looks he was
might be
taking
the
is,
best one ever, right?
yeah, is just insane. I do buy the passing a little bit more, I think. I mean, it was a really fun Kentucky team to watch, kind of going back and revisiting the film, with both him and Dillingham, because Dillingham is probably someone who's going to slip because he's small and doesn't have the defensive ability that Sheppard does, or the like as pure of a shooting ability as Sheppard does. But just watching both of them handle the ball and play in transition was so fun. I think, especially in transition, I really buy Reed's passing feel. I like how he's always looking for hit ahead looks and pushing the pace. I think that's something that's really important for NBA point guards. And yeah, I do have worries about the rim pressure. I have that down as a weakness for him. I think he's pretty good at finishing and being crafty once he gets there, but he just doesn't get there as much as you'd like him to. So if we're thinking about kind of two-way point guards who subsist mostly off jump shots, I guess the prototype is like Fred VanVleet, I suppose. And VanVleet was not like a super efficient player last year, but was, a really valuable player for the Raptors for years, and pretty sure he made an all-star team. So that's kind of like my favorite comp for Reed Sheppard. I do see. I mean, I buy some of the floor general stuff where I could see like a Mike Conley type outcome. That's one that's been thrown around as well. And then I think the floor is probably someone like Patty Mills, who's still like a valuable NBA player. I definitely think he's kind of like a will not fail prospect. Certainly, I can hear the questions about ceiling in terms of like, yeah, the defensive numbers are good in terms of steals and blocks and things like that, but does he really hold up one-on-one in the same way? That's a valid question, but I just am not going to pass up the shooting, the passing, the overall feel, and then the competitiveness on the defensive end as well. So I've got him in my sort of top tier of three. He's going to end up somewhere at one, two, or three, but yeah.
I have him at 2. I've had him as low as 6 in this process, so I understand the concerns, but he's just firmly in the category of guys I'm okay being wrong about. College 3-point shooting numbers can be deceiving. Again, these guys play like 30 games. So Bub shooting 32% doesn't really scare me. I know he's a great shooter. I mean, I know that Reed Sheppard is an all-time great college shooter, but 50%, like you said, it's just a number that distorts your whole perception of him as a player. And it's really hard to know, like, is he just an elite shooter? Is he a generational shooter, which, like you said, could open things up? Sam Vecini said something about Reed that I thought was really interesting. He thinks Tyrese Halliburton's shooting is an interesting touchstone for Reed Sheppard. Like if you don't have counters on counters on counters, but you can just make 40% from 27 feet, it doesn't really matter. Like you'll figure it out. You can still run high ball screens and create opportunities for yourself and others.
He's got the height advantage though, right? Like that's the other thing. Like if Reed was 6'5", I'd probably feel a little bit different about him. So, the threshold for 6'3" guards just succeeding in the NBA. I mean, Scoot, I said, was probably like an all-time point guard prospect that I scouted. You know what I mean? Like I would even say like generational in a way, like where if you're looking at point guard prospects, like the best one since insert like generational name like Chris Paul. Like I firmly believe that. And he struggled going in, and he's like was physically strong enough day one to play in the NBA. And it's just, I like I said, this is what keeps me up at night. Like he's the one guy that I struggle with. And it's, I don't know, man. Like, I'm kind of willing to be wrong, like in the very similar range. Like, I'm still not out on him. Like I have him 8. Like players that I'm out on, like I have Ron Holland at 14. I have Matas Buzelis at 21. Right. I have Keyshawn George at like 34. Right. I have Reed 8. I'm not out on him. I'm seeing where he's getting ranked, even by like my peers at No Ceilings. I'm just like, these guys, like
I see Corey's a Reed / Klingon guy at the top, which again I respect. I've Reed it too. To your point though, freshman Fred VanVleet, albeit at Wichita State, got to the rim twice as often as Reed Sheppard. It's like I heard also Vecini go on this rant about like Bronny versus Avery Bradley. The bar is so high. Like you have to be so good just to scale down and still be a really good NBA player. It's very interesting, but I continue to look at outliers like Steph, Pistons, Isaiah Thomas, Chris Paul, Steve Nash, Tony Parker, Brunson, VanVleet. Like, just to remind myself, even though Reed isn't a ton like any of these guys, it's important to remember there are paths to greatness at his size. And maybe, just maybe, he's a special enough shooter / basketball thinker / athlete to be the next great small guard, but it's going to be an uphill battle. I don't trust the combine measurements. They got it wrong. He does not have a 42-inch vert. He probably has a 39-inch vert and an 8-foot standing reach. So he's a normal small guard. Don't panic. Don't panic, Drew. All right. We're going to let you get out of here. I just want to ask you one last question, Stephen. Who are you highest on relative to consensus in this class, and why is it Pacome Dadiet?
So I have Pacome 16. I'll ask you this: is Pacome at 16 or Jaylon Tyson at 13, like the crazier one?
You know what? I don't think either of them are crazy, and I think I'm falling in love with you because I have Jaylon Tyson at 14, and I have Pacome Dadiet at 7.
I
I
love
just
I love Pacome, man. I love him. I wrote a whole article as to why people need to consider him as highly as they are with Tijane Salon, because people act
higher.
like because like Tijane is like probably going to be a top 10 dude on most boards by the time the draft rolls around, because Pacome's an inch shorter, weighs just as much as him. Played the point guard growing up in France, played the 4 at Ratio Farm, and is probably going to be like a 2 or 3 in the NBA. He's a much better 3-point shooter. Out of all the international prospects that Gavoni wrote about for the international combine that took place, and even KOC on the Ringer was like, I don't know how they do these, because look, like everybody's numbers were bad, and Pacome was on there, and he tested amazing. And everyone's like, oh, these numbers don't mean anything. Like, no, they certainly do, because like Pacome was like tested out like as the best athlete out of that entire group. So, and he's the most polished offensive dude like out of that group as well. So it's like, okay, so he's 15 days older than Tijane Salon. He's a more polished offensive player as Tijane Salon. He is only an inch shorter, weighs just as much, and has just as much upside to improve on the defensive end as everybody is hoping that Tijane Salon can, because when he hits occasionally, very occasionally, like a dribble jumper, everyone's like, oh my gosh, like this dude just hit a 3-pointer. Meanwhile, Pacome like lives at the 3-point line. I think that he can improve and is not like a terrible defender by any means, and is a good athlete, and is 6'9" with a stroke. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't understand why there's such a chasm between Tijane Salon
It's
and
crazy
Pacome
to me.
Dadiet.
I watched Pacome early in this process, and I got goosebumps. I felt like Christian Bale in The Big Short. I was like, why is this dude not in every single lottery? I've yet to identify a stark weakness in his offensive game. The defensive awareness will need work, but guess what? He's still going to be 18 on draft night.
Yep.
To your point about, bag culture has become very overrated, but you're right to point it out with Reed Sheppard, because at his size, you got to have a deep bag to survive and be an all-star offensively. Pacome has a bag at 6'9". Like the handle is tight. It's reactive. I'm in love with this kid. Like I want, if the Blazers took him at 7, I would be so down with it. It's not going to happen, but inevitably when Sam Presti steals him at 12, I am going to be heartbroken because I really think you could argue this is one of the most interesting upsides in the draft. And the fact that he's very unlikely to go in the top 10 is frankly crazy to me.
Yeah, and I've struggled like logistically with Pacome Dadiet because my process is watching full game tape, and it is so hard to find full game tape from this season of Dadiet's. I've only seen one full game, and it was enough to get me like Googling every day to see if another one has popped up, which it hasn't yet. But yeah, the fluidity, the shot making, I agree. Like, and I'm pretty low on Tijane Salon relative to consensus. Like I have him in the 20s. I just think he's really raw, and I don't really buy the ball skills, and I just think people are sort of billing him as like the high ceiling like super athlete prospect, but I think his handle's really bad. I think his playmaking's not great, and I don't see a huge avenue for off the dribble scoring. So yeah,
he's like Matas Buzelis without a handle.
Exactly. So
and more shooting hope for Tijane.
Yeah. I'm hoping to
Yeah.
see more Pacome. I loved what I saw initially, and I love the Jaylon Tyson shout out too. Drew and I both big fans of his. He had also some of the more fun tape to watch from what I've seen. Mentioned that with Devin Carter. Tyson's kind of similar in terms of the sort of outrageousness of some of the things that he tries. Some of the off the dribble threes that seem kind of second nature to him when they definitely should not be second nature. And I haven't followed like his whole progress through college of like jumping around teams and things like that. But just from evaluating his tape this year, I love the kind of three level scoring, which if as a team like scooping someone up in the teens or 20s, like getting a guy who's a legit three-level scorer is pretty rare, and I think Tyson has that ability. And then
Watch the Texas Tech tape on defense, and you'll be even more in love with him. Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think about this also with Dalton Connect and certain really high usage offensive guys in college. They're going to scale down so much on offense and have more energy in the tank for defensive effort. So yeah, I agree with you. There's Tyson's power and his passable wing size. I think he's going to figure it out. He plays too hard.
Yeah, I wrote down wow for a number of his like plays and put back dunks, and which is crazy because he didn't test that great. And one of my flaws I've realized in my film session is I'm not great at identifying athleticism. Like I love J-Dub, but I thought his athleticism was like a real con when I was scouting him initially. I just really loved his size and playmaking and like shot making creativity. But when I was watching Tyson, I was like, man, this guy's a crazy athlete. And then his numbers didn't really say that at the combine, but he functionally he makes some crazy athletic plays.
he's impressing some folks during the pre-draft process too. So I was big on Jaylon coming in. Like at the beginning of the cycle, I started a series inspired by Bill Simmons. I called it the Rescoutables, and I was like, here's four players, that are perimeter, four that are big men that film aged incredibly well over the summer. That's not getting a lot of buzz, and Jaylon was like far and away my favorite one. I had Cam Jones on there too out of Marquette, who I really love this year as well. But yeah, if you love him now, Max, like I'm telling you, go watch his Texas Tech defensive, because right now everyone's like, well, yeah, like if dude fouls out, California can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
He was the engine for that team. So people are like, I don't know how he scales or anything like that. Texas Tech, they do two things. They get athletes and they get defenders. And like Jaylon Tyson was like very good at both. And this year, like he had that experimentation year where he was like the engine. It's not going to happen for him in the NBA, but like that improved dynamic 3-point ability that he had this year, that was brand new. So like that's all stuff that he added to his bag playing for Coach Madsen at Cal.
Yeah.
It's
And
yeah.
good to know he's going to be in my top five soon. I'll watch that.
There you go.
Tyson also has some of the most head scratching turnovers of anyone's tape, which is crazy because his tape ceiling is so high.
Though, man.
Yeah.
It's all experimentation. It's his first year being the offensive fulcrum on a team. And like sometimes it's not the production, but it's the process with the player that you really got to like look at and be like, okay, that's cool that he's got that in his bag, because like all of the best role players in the NBA were stars at some degree, like at college, right? So now that Jaylon has that experimentation as a star and knowing what like he needed from role players on his team, I think that helps him scale down at the next level, because now he knows what the star on his team is going to need, because he needed it this year at Cal.
Yeah.
So.
And some of the most impressive in lane hop steps to get to a touch finish you'll see. And I don't care that he wasn't an elite tester at the combine. He is athletic as hell on a basketball court. Athletic as hell for the Pac-12, probably a slightly above average athlete for the NBA.
But back dunks on, yeah.
Yes, sir. All right, Stephen. Lastly, you said the Thunder are the closest thing you have to a team. You can take the fan out of the scout. I don't think there's a way to finish that expression. But if you're picking for OKC at number 12, who's a guy in that range that you'd be most excited about secretly, even though you can't tweet about it because you got to be neutral for your profession?
Well, I don't have to be secret about it anymore. We talked offline about how I used to have an NBA podcast. Now I'm just like a basketball scout, so I can like dabble in my fandom again. I Now that they have Caruso, I've talked about it on a number of shows, but I think Jaylon Tyson like really would look good in Oklahoma City because they already have guards. Like it gives you the ability to always kind of have like a wing size player. Now that they've gotten rid of Josh Giddey, they're really lacking some size in some areas now, right? So Tyson isn't huge, but in shoes he's about 6'7", maybe a little bit more. And having a true wing added to Oklahoma City instead like this of this bevy of guards, I think that would really help them out. And that gives you, now that they're wanting to experiment with Chet as a playmaker, you got a guy who you can move the ball to, who can shoot threes, who can drive and attack, and who you can kind of trust to make smart reads with the ball, and is going to be a good defender as well. And I think dribble pass shoot defense is what Oklahoma City is looking for. I think at 12, it's going to be a stretch for a lot of people. But man, if it's not a secret and I get to be excited about it, no one else. I mean, Jaylon Tyson to OKC just seems like it would fit.
Love it. You mentioned Chris Middleton earlier today. Credit to Max for seeing some of Chris Middleton in the Jaylon Tyson back to the basket creation on guards and wings. Like he just has some of that, and people forget Chris Middleton shot below 30% at Texas A&M. Guys develop, and some of this is out of our hands. Stephen Gillaspie, thank you so much for joining us today. It is an honor. We hope to have you back again at some point soon. I hope you can sleep at some point soon. And everyone check out the stuff from Stephen at No Ceilings and the other guys. They're just making some awesome stuff right now, and we are so lucky to have you.
Yeah, Drew, Max, seriously, anytime. You got someone who's going to be on your podcast for life now, right? So again, I don't say that lightly. So whenever you guys need somebody, I'll find a way to be here. Thank y'all for just having the interest and wanting me to come on the show. Notice upstarting a podcast. I notice like to be left on red and be told no. I try to say yes as much as I can. And so I appreciate y'all having the interest in me to come on and share what little I know about basketball. But and thanks for the plug. You know, our draft guide is out at noceilingsnba.com. We've got a lot of great things. So we just did Metcalf and I just did a Ask Me Anything for Trilly Donovan over at Burner Ball. Corey was on this like extravagant like field of 68 mock draft. Metcalf is going to be on Andrew Schleck's like draft bonanza. We have a lot of stuff like at No Ceilings. We're going to have Keith Smith from the front office show be on Draft Sickos. I think we're going to have John Fanta come on from CBS Sports. So we're getting big over at No Ceiling. So we would love for that audience to grow. So anybody that's out there watching or listening, continue to support Drew and Max, and we would love to have y'all be a part of the No Ceilings universe as well.
And we're going to start a petition for you to take Jeff Goodman's spot in that big roundtable draft because, damn it.
We love Jeff. We love Jeff. Jeff's a great dude.
No, he's a legend of the game. Legend of the game, Jeff Goodman. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back soon. Peace.
Boris Dirk.